Hey friends, Alexis here. Just letting you know that unfortunately, when we were recording this episode, an audio issue occurred that ended up being unrecoverable. Luckily, we take a backup recording during episodes so that if something like this happens, we can still release it. So this episode isn't going to be to our normal standards of audio quality, but it's still definitely listenable, and the episode itself was frankly fantastic. So apologies for the dip in quality, but nonetheless, please enjoy.
It's time to set the record queer. Oh wait, do we have the tags for this episode yet?
Welcome to Setting the Record Queer, a podcast where queer people talk about the pursuits and communities they love. This is episode 36, and it's about a webcomics library. My name is Alexis, my pronouns are it, and she, her, and I'm one of your hosts.
My name's Kaylee, my pronouns are she, her, and I'm your other host.
This is maybe the fourth or fifth episode in a row where Kaylee and I are just falling asleep in our chairs, but it's fine.
I started a new job semi-recently, and we haven't adjusted to the hours, but that's fine.
We are managing, as the kids say.
We haven't done a lot with our weeks. I've been working on the RPGs We Love 3 schedule. That's going to be from February 16th to February 22nd. It's going to be super fun. The schedule is 99.99% likelihood going to be out by the time that the this episode airs, and we'll put a link to it in the show notes. To be very safe, I will not say anything about what's on the schedule, just in case, I guess, the internet gets set on fire and we have to go wait. I'm not gonna spoil it here, but yeah, it's we got some good stuff there. There's something I'm doing for it specifically, which I'm very excited for, which I'm not even sure if we're going to put on the schedule or leave as like a mystery on the schedule, but it's going to be good and you should be excited.
I'm also excited for these things. I just finished my winter break. I did a whole lot of pretty much exactly nothing. I pretty much played Final Fantasy XIV as if it was a full-time job, and it was amazing. But I have absolutely nothing to report from that time. Actually, no, I have one thing to report. Relic weapons aren't worth it. That's all.
I have one thing to report, and it's that I worked a full-time job as if it was a full-time job.
Was it worth it?
I mean, yeah, because it paid rent. The only other thing I think we have to cover from our weeks is actually what we're going to be screaming about next episode, which is that we managed to get tickets to the Near Automata live orchestra concert in Chicago.
I'm so excited. I'm so excited.
I'm really excited too. Anyway, let's not talk about that because we're going to gush about it next time.
Yeah. Look forward to us screaming. If we don't get personally murdered by Yoko Taro, we'll see. We'll see what happens.
But, Alexis, did you know
Here comes the terrible transition. I'm just used to this now.
Did you know that media is usually stored in libraries?
If I don't answer that question, will you stop?
If you don't answer that question, the podcast will never move on, and it'll just be 2 hours of us lingering on that joke.
Well, that's fine, because nothing is worth you finishing that transition. Thanks for everyone for listening to Setting the Record Queer. It's been a fun 35 episodes and 5 minutes.
Special thanks to our guest who came in just for this. Didn't even get to speak. So
anyways, I'm going to cut Kaylee off now before she makes another terrible transition. With us today, we have Luma, who runs a webcomics library. Hello, Luma.
Hi. So I'm Luma. I use ze, them, and they, them pronouns, and I run Webcomic Library. Webcomic Library is an archive that I run. I run a couple of our blogs based on it. So it's an archive that I started back in 2016 or so that keeps track of comics based on a lot of different variables, everything from genre to LGBT representation to content warnings to page counts. I have over, say 1,300 comics at this point.
That's a
for
lot.
the past few years.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a large number.
It's a few. It's a few.
I think I can read those all in like 15 minutes, 20 if I want to take a snack in the middle.
I've read about 1,300. I keep up. Well, I haven't read 1,300. I've gone through about maybe 1,100 out of all of those at this point.
That's still a very large number.
I try.
Yeah, but that... So what kind of form does this all take? Let's just dive right into how this all works. You have your webcomics library, you have 1,300, you have this whole tagging system. What kind of form, like place of storage, like as to where a library has, shelves in a building? How do I go about finding all of these webcomics?
So the program that I'm using currently is Tag Packer, which is actually meant more for bookmarking on your desktops. So for that, I'm essentially able to upload a link and then it'll upload a photo summary, and then from there I can make my own tagging system that I use to categorize out the comics as I go along. It's really nice, especially since I'm keeping track of so many different comics. It makes it really easy to go back and edit all the comics, because the real trick isn't necessarily the fact that I have so many links, more the fact that the thing about webcomics is that it's constantly updating. I can easily go through about at least 50 to 70 updates in a single day.
Oh gosh. How much time do you put into this every day?
Well, it kind of varies. I generally have like a kind of do whatever I feel like policy, where if I feel inspired to look at updates, I'll do that one day. If I end up working on some kind of master post, or if I'm just looking for stuff to boost another day, I'll do that. So I'm usually in the mood for looking at comic updates. I tend to use RSS feeds to kind of keep track of all that, with the exception of Tapas, which actually has a decent notification system.
Shout out to RSS feeds.
Tapas is one of the many, many, many different comic domains that you can use to upload your webcomics. It's one of the more popular ones at the moment. You can read it on your phone. You can read it on your desktop. There's a few different ones around, Tapas being one of them. Webtoons is a little bit similar. Smack Jeeves, Comic Fury. You can also host your own webcomic. I often like using Tapas since it has such an intuitive notification system. It'll just automatically show me what comics have updated. And if somebody has made any kind of post, I can easily just toggle through all the different updates, which I can't really do on most of them, at least to my liking.
Mm-hmm.
So for just about everything else, if it has an RSS feed, I'll generally use that. And if I don't have either of those options, it just kind of happens whenever I remember to look up the comic. I need to make a list of all the comics that don't have RSS feeds, specifically Smack Jeeves at this point, because they just rolled through an update that got rid of RSS feeds, which is great.
Yeah, a lot of companies and platforms have been phasing out RSS for a number of years now, and it sucks because RSS is great.
Well, they don't offer an alternative either.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, like, sure, cut it. Let's make a new and improved version of RSS that doesn't look like a terrible HTML document. Oh, you just got rid of it and didn't replace it? Oh.
We have
Yeah.
like 6 different RSS feeds.
Yeah, I mean, we're a podcast. Podcasting is like the primary thing that uses RSS feeds in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
But
I
anyways.
honestly I didn't even know that RSS feeds were a thing until about a year into my webcomic archiving work.
Oh no.
I had a Google spreadsheet, and the reason how it started when I started doing specifically webcomics was the fact that I was getting so tired of having to scroll through every single comic trying to figure out which ones have updated that I just made a new spreadsheet that would automatically link me up depending on the day of the week.
Jeez.
Sounds like a lot. So let's talk a little bit about webcomics. So what got you into webcomics in the first place?
Well, I've always been quite the reader. I've been able to read since before I can remember, though I didn't really get into comics themselves until high school when I had my friend Val. Hi, Val. They started letting me borrow comics throughout that they brought into school. And then one day I got tired of trying to remember what people kept recommending me on any kind of media. Like, it didn't matter, like webcomics, anime, fan fiction. I got, like, processing disorder does not compute. So I made a Google spreadsheet to figure out what kind of, what I should look up whenever I was bored. So I started this spreadsheet, which I called the Link Library, which is the predecessor to the Webcomic Library. And when I started this up, I let my friends put stuff on there, and Val went, "Hey, you should read some of these webcomics. They're pretty great." And I went, "Okay." And then I read them, and I kind of fell down the hole. I read what they gave me, and then I looked up what those creators recommended, and then I just like spider webbed throughout all these different sites and domains until I ended up finding what is called, I think nowadays it's LGBT webcomics, which was originally part of this larger group called the Slash File, which kept track of LGBT comics and other types of media. And around this time, I was also realizing that I didn't entirely understand what romance was. I just thought it was just kind of like a thing that everybody agreed that existed but didn't actually exist. Like social norms. So...
Social norms don't exist. Don't be silly.
Like, they exist, but do they really need to exist? We just kind of go along with it without really questioning it. And then I realized it was an actual thing, and I had a slight identity crisis, which is when I started realizing that it was airways. So I was looking for representation in various forms, like through anime, through TV shows, but I wasn't really finding any. And then I come across LGBT webcomics, or Slash Pile this time, and they just had a slew of different comics from all these different perspectives and genders and sexualities. And I went from dipping my toe in to just fully just scuba diving just down. It was just a spiral. And I do not regret that. Not one bit.
All right, well, now we've got to know. Name your top favorite webcomics. Let's just get this out of the way now.
Like with the amount of comics I read, you wouldn't think that I'd have like an absolute favorite. Be like, oh no, what kind of comic? And no, it's The Property of Hate. The Property of Hate is essentially a story about a child getting taken to a world where everything is not who they are, but what they are. And thus this child becomes the hero of this world, but doesn't entirely understand what that means. So now she's journeying now she's journeying through this world to an end that we don't even know yet, to do something we also don't yet know yet. But we're discovering quite a bit about this world along the way, and we're watching all these relationships develop. It's such a beautiful comic. It was one of those ones that I started off with, and it still doesn't cease to amaze me with each update. I genuinely recommend it.
Sounds neat. Also sounds like a very thinly veiled metaphor for navigating a world as a neurodivergent person, but like, hey, what do I know? I'm only a neurodivergent person navigating a world.
Wait, give us two more.
That.
2 more.
Ooh, okay. Let's see. So one of the ones that really spoke to me when I started getting into more of the LGBT section of webcomics is this little comic called Ignition Zero. So Ignition Zero is essentially a story about the world of fairies and the world of humans merging together. And it's a beautiful comic because it's actually done in watercolor. A lot of the comics webcomics I see around are usually digital, or they'll have a mix of traditional inks and digital art. But this one's almost entirely done in watercolor, which makes it very unique in that sense. But one of my favorite things about it is that at the very end is actually a completed comic. 2 of the characters that makes up the main cast actually end up in a queer platonic relationship, which I don't have that many comics or even just media in general that actually covers those types of relationships and how they develop. And as I read those updates, when it was going through those final updates, I honestly cried because you don't really see that kind of representation. I can't imagine seeing that kind of representation in any type of media other than webcomics. Hey, Gloomverse is pretty great. Gloomverse is another comic that I started off with really early on, recommended for my friend. It's essentially about this world that's filled with magicians. Like, not like your class, like the magicians like show, but they actually have hats that they pull out wands from and they do different types of magic. And you're following this girl who originally doesn't even have a hat. She doesn't have any powers, even though it's very rare for somebody as old as her to not have magic. And then she ends up on her own and somehow, by sheer luck, ends up with Wallace, who is one of the biggest performer magicians in the area, as his assistant. And chaos ensues. It takes a very steep turn plot-wise, because it starts off very light, and then you get towards the end of the first act, and you just realize there's so much more going on in this world than you expected. But it's such a good read.
I'm going to be honest, I totally expected when you said that, because, like, I don't read that many webcomics, but, like, I know a webcomic or two. And I was expecting to hear you read that list and then go, oh, yeah, that one. I don't know.
Well, sounds like you've got stuff to read, Kaylee.
Does sound like I have things to read. I used to read a lot of webcomics, but now the only webcomic I read is Ray the Doe.
I just finished up that episode. I still need to add. I need to add it to my archive just so I can reference it whenever I need something to read.
Ray the Doe, very good. I was in the Christmas special also, and y'all should go listen to it. It was great.
Oh yeah, we'll put that in the show notes.
I guess that's actually worth mentioning. Yeah, I played the Ghost of Christmas Future. I had a whole 1 paragraph of dialogue, and it was so fun.
It was good though.
That's iconic.
All right, so let's kind of dive more into. We've touched on this, but let's dive a little more into it. What went into building the library in the first place, and what does it look like when you're maintaining it now?
Well, when I first started Webcomic Library, I actually started it in a Google spreadsheet because I was just looking to hyperlink comics, and then I would have a tab to color code different topics. For example, I'd have like bold if it was completed. I had different colors depending on where the comic would lead you in terms of domains, if you can subscribe to one of these domains so you can easily keep track of your updates and so forth. About a year into it, I discovered Tag Packer, which is what I'm currently using. So nowadays, when I start off, usually when I'm looking for comics, I get them from a lot of different sources. I do have a submission system now, so I get quite a few of my comics from there, where people will actually send me links and all the information I need to add it into my archive. But whenever I'm looking for comics, I usually, since I get so many different comics through my various feeds, I tend to go for the ones that actually stand out to me and I want to read right then, right there. So once I do that, then I will go into Tag Packer and take the link. I put in as much information as I can based on just what I can find looking at the page. I first look at the actual like pages, figure out how long this comic is, when this comic first starts, what's all the links that I can actually read this comic in. And then depending on if I'm going to actually read the comic right then and there, I might add a need to read tag. So that way I know that there's certain things that I haven't added on yet, or I haven't been able to fully get into the comic yet to fully immerse the comic and make sure it's accurate as possible. So from there, when I'm actually reading the comic, it kind of turns into a comic bingo, where I'm reading the comic and I go, okay, so there's a little bit of blood. Let me just tag that really quick.
I like how you switched to the like stereotype vampire accent right there, while noting that the comic had blood.
I do have a vampire. I do have a vampire tag as well.
You really got everything covered. You've got blood, you've got vampires, you've got LGBT. I don't think there are any other relevant categories of media.
What about blood, vampire, LGBT?
Ah, yes, of course. Blood, vampire, LGBT, often shortened to good.
I think that's, what is it, Paint the Town Red? It's weird that I can think of that right off the top of my head. But yeah, so once I actually go through the comic, then I actually subscribe to their RSS feeds, and then I'm actually keeping up, at least attempting to keep up update to update. So when I'm doing that generally happens just about anywhere. I tend to keep my reading to my desktop just because it's a little bit easier for me to keep track of tags that way. But every once in a while, I'll just read on my phone if I'm traveling. Like, if I'm just, like, waiting in a line, I usually end up flipping my phone up to Tapas or Webtoons. Once I have a comic either fully submitted into my archive or I've actually read it cover to cover, from there, that's when I normally actually start promoting comics in my library, because I try to promote comics that I actually have fully fleshed out in my library, so people who are following me can reference back to my library in case they need any kind of additional information on what I'm promoting. This is especially true with content warnings, because I try and be as meticulous as I can about it. Since I actually used to be part of a ACE chat room where we had a lot of people who had various triggers. So I personally have certain things that can also cause me panic attacks. So it's really important to me to have a way for people to reference and feel safe while they're reading, and just make the community feel more friendly towards folks that might need those kinds of warnings.
So, in what ways would you say you take inspiration from traditional libraries, and where do you think you're different?
Well, with a lot of libraries, that's a good question. Well, I think the big thing with like the library atmosphere that I really enjoy is the fact that you kind of feel open to explore various types of content with a lot of different approaches. I took a lot of inspiration from LGBT webcomics, which I've referenced before, just because I get to connect people who might not be able to find certain types of representation and help creators find followers who might enjoy their content. Makes my stuff unique is the fact that I try and actively connect to various creators and readers and try and give them ideas of what they might enjoy. I do various master posts. I try and promote places that other creators can promote their works for other people to see. I try and make resources available so creators and readers alike can have places to find other people who are also in the community. And I get to kind of create a community of my own through my own work to just enjoy the medium in its own right.
Sounds awesome. And also sounds like an interesting parallel to like the way that I guess libraries are so much more than collections of books, and yours is really the same in that regard, which is cool. Hot take, library's good.
What?
Yeah, I know. I'm sure that's a very spicy opinion to the demographic of this podcast. 100%. We're probably going to lose like all of our listeners now. But anyways, might as well get a couple more questions off as people storm away angrily. So when you're pulling all of this together, I mean, this is the work of a lot of other artists and writers and other, webcomic folks. So do you have like any interactions with the artists of these webcomics? And if so, what kinds of interactions, and how does that shape the webcomic library?
I have a few different methods for connecting with creators. One of the ways is through submissions. So like I often I have a submission form that people can email me, and I keep it as a short response style of template. So sometimes if somebody has something that, one of the most common things that I see whenever somebody's filling out the LGBT section, like what kind of LGBT content might you have in your content, in your comic? The most common one is, oh, I have some LGBT folk, though it's not really covered, so I'm not sure if it counts. Which is really weird to me, because coming from a space where like I have to like excavate for this LGBT content, and somebody's going, oh, I have this LGBT content, but is it really LGBT content? I'm like, no, yes, absolutely. Please come forth. Let me have it. Let me introduce you to all these people. People want to read your content. It doesn't matter if it's prevalent or not. If it's canon and it's something that's important to this character, to how they express themselves, then it's valid. Gosh darn it. And then, which I think kind of catches people off guard sometimes. Some of the other ways I connect with creators is I actually co-admin a webcomics Discord that's specifically for LGBT folks with webcomic updates, which is another Twitter account that specifically does, well, webcomic updates, and they also do various threads for people to promote their content with. And they started a Discord. And so I get to hear a lot of the conversations about what representation means, how do I express certain emotions and interactions the best to my viewers, how do I promote my content in a way that'll actually reach the people that I want to reach. And it really sparks quite a few interesting conversations. And it seems like people are always surprised when I kind of join in, because I have such a different perspective from not being entirely a consistent content creator as somebody who reads a lot of content. So I have a fresh perspective is what I'm trying to say.
So besides the obvious, curation and, organization and I guess like filing of webcomics, what other things do you do with the library? Do you collect things together? You've mentioned, how you make recommendations sometimes and stuff like that. What else do you do beyond just making lists of webcomics and their pertinent information?
So some of the other ways I try and promote content is through my blogs. I have blogs on both Tumblr, Twitter, and currently Pillow Fort. So I often go through content. I try to promote short comics as well as whenever a comic updates that's in my archive, as well as various Kickstarter events that are going on. I try and promote various like Twitter threads, different events that are going on in the community where people might be joining in. One of my favorite times of the year for webcomic events of sorts is during Pride Month in June, because most of the comic creators who have queer characters will oftentimes make group photos of their characters wearing their different pride flags. And the reason why it's one of my favorite times of the year is the fact that it makes it so easy for me to just look at the photo and then plug in the representation in their comic. It helps me so much.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Because sometimes you just can't, like, you know that this woman loves another woman, but you don't know where to entirely place them. I have a few different tags depending on the situation. But if I know the specific sexuality, oh boy, it's the good stuff. It's the good stuff.
So the good stuff, I can confirm. It's the good stuff. So outside of the webcomics Discord that you've already mentioned, what other sort of community is there around your webcomics library? I know you have these blogs associated with it and everything. You have this Discord. What sort of group is there that follows all of this, and in what ways do they all, communicate and community-ify? I'm not going to try and figure out what word to use there. You know what I mean.
If there was only some word that had the same root as community that meant to talk.
If only. It's too bad that word doesn't exist.
Communicate.
Nah, that's not a real word. Don't be silly.
All words are made up.
It's true.
Yeah, the webcomic community is pretty vast. So, like, within my own works, like, we have the Discord. There's a lot of different threads that are going around. Sometimes people will pop into my DMs to recommend me comics, or will send me asks on certain topics if they're looking for specific work. Within the webcomics community, there's a lot of different ways to get involved. There's Comic Tea Party is one of them. They do weekly kind of...
Well, I mean, as we've already established, words are fake, so...
Yeah, most words are fake, but I know I have a specific one in mind. They kind of do like a kind of a book club almost. They have different comics every week that they'll read, and then encourage folks to leave comments. They have this thing called Comic Storm specifically where they go, okay, here is a comic, go read it and leave as many comments as you can because this person deserves all the love. They also do different chats on various points in the community, like how do you express certain things, how do you schedule updates, and how does that affect your how people find you. And a lot of comic domains like TapS and Webtoons have various ways to engage the community, like forums, or they'll have a specific Twitter that will reblog updates through that method.
Is there any sort of specific community that takes place, centered around the library? Do you have like a Discord server or anything, or like Twitter community?
Well, the Discord is that I'm talking about is kind of co-admined. So even though it's specifically webcomic updates, Discord, a lot of people who follow them also might follow me as well. So there's kind of a community within that. There's also I have quite a few folks who interact with my stuff. Though, I don't know. I kind of view Webcomic Library as kind of like a waypoint in between communities, almost. Because like I'm kind of directing people to various other communities within the community, in a sense.
Cool.
So a lot of people who are following me are looking for other communities to interact with and follow for either for like individual webcomics, or are looking to get involved with the creators, with various creator communities, or just wanting to hang out on their lonesome and read some cool comics.
That's really interesting. I don't think we have ever had anything on this podcast quite like that, in terms of a community that is a waypoint between communities. Neat. The power of libraries.
Yeah, there's a lot of different branches to the webcomic community, because you have your creators who can come in many forms. There's a lot of different ways to get involved. You can either just do comic strips. Some people will do entire audio tracks specifically for their comics. Some people have various formats where they actually include little videos into their comics for various key scenes, which are very interesting. You have various readers who will do various things to kind of promote the community, or just hang out on their lonesome and just kind of might comment here and there. And then you have people like me who just are like, here's my comics. Go forth. Read to your content.
Read 1,300 webcomics. Have fun.
Live your best life through my library.
So what's it like being queer in the wide world of webcomics communities? I mean, I would have to imagine that there are some communities that are better than others. And I mean, I've definitely seen that webcomics as a whole are, I feel like on average, significantly more diverse than a lot of other forms of media, quite possibly because they're very modern and all sorts of other stuff like that. But what's it like being queer in these webcomic spaces, both besides and including your explicitly queer webcomics Discord?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of queer content in the webcomics community. I mean, that's how I really got into webcomics. There's quite a big niche in the community for queer content. I originally started off looking for queer content, but nowadays I just kind of stumble upon it, which is a little bit of a new experience, because sometimes I'll just be like, oh hey, this is an adventure comic. Oh, the main character is trans. That's great. There's also a bunch of queer creators who are just trying to make the content that they wanted to see in the world in various ways. Sometimes you'll see an autobiography. Some people will just make an entire world just filled with queer folk. Just living the dream, I guess.
So, are there any events that occur within the webcomic communities? I'm not really sure if they're like, you know, collaboration, like big like collaborative projects that people do together, or like cons or anything like that.
Oh boy, where do we even start? So
That's the answer we like to hear on this podcast.
well, you like one of the nice things about webcomics is that people are so every once in a while just kind of collaborating all the time. Like in an individual comic, you always have people making guest comics for various groups. You have people like doing comics tea party where they're just kind of sending love to certain comics. Kickstarters are a really big thing. Anthologies of comics are always being made. Zines are always being made. There's a group, a person I follow who does a anthology called Webcomic Almanac, which is essentially a zine of illustrations from various webcomics with information on how to find them. And then it's all compiled together into essentially like almost kind of similar to the mass posts that I also do to promote comics. And then if people buy them, then the funds will go to various charities. Let's see, what else? I mean, cons, you'll also often see various comic creators at cons, even if it's just one or two. There's one local where I live that's called Staple. That one specifically focuses on indie comics, small press. There's also SPX, which is a small press comics expo. I believe it's in Virginia. They collaborate with the actual Library of Congress to they actually have an awards ceremony, awards for various comics within the community. They have a specific category for webcomics, I believe, and then whatever comics actually win will actually be archived in the Library of Congress, which is pretty cool. And there's ones from all over the world. There's TFAC, Thought Bubble's in the UK, TFAC, am I saying TFAC or TA? But yeah, there's a lot of different there's a lot of smaller cons that go on in the community. There's larger ones in all different parts of the world. You'll often see comic creators at larger comic cons, like Emerald City Comic Con is one that I know has a lot of comic book go to. FlameCon in New York. And of course, there's also different promotion events like the I Am Non-Binary tag that happened, I think, this past week, where you have a lot of folks that are promoting themselves as non-binary, and you have a lot of webcomic creators who are non-binary will use that as an opportunity to promote their works. Oh, Portfolio Day, Pride Month, obviously. There's just so many different ways to get involved with the community, promote your content, or just find new comics to read. It's kind of wild. It's one of the things that I generally enjoy about the comics community.
Normally we ask how someone can get started in this. And as a webcomics like archivist, I guess I would ask, is there room for kind of more hands on deck for this project? And if so, how would you recommend they get involved with doing this?
There's always room for more folks to be doing more comic specific stuff. I mean, what I'm doing right now is just a drop in the ocean compared to all the comics that are out there. There's hundreds of thousands of comics out there that I probably haven't even heard of. So there's always room for more people to actually be out there looking for more content, coming up with their own methods to create, to make more archives, to find content. It doesn't necessarily have to be webcomics. I don't know a lot of groups that are doing like archiving in the way that I'm doing it in any other medium. I'm not sure if there's other folks who are doing archiving for LGBT content, disabled content, or just in general in the way that at least I'm doing it. I'd love to see more folks kind of take whatever medium that has their passion and just have a way for other people to get involved with the community and read or listen to or watch more content in the medium that they love. So if you're looking to get into the community, like into more archiving work, kind of like what I'm doing, I'd say the main thing to get set up early on is to get into the habit of taking content that you're finding and putting it directly into whatever kind of archive setup that you have. Because if you're working on something like webcomics where you're getting new content all the time, it's going to get very overwhelming very quickly if you don't keep on top of that. So having a good system, not only to categorize your content, but also keep up with your content is extremely important, especially early on when you're starting smaller, because you're going to end up with more as you go along.
So, all right, last question for this segment. What's in the future for the Webcomics Library? What are there any new features, new comics, new anything that's coming up in the future?
Let's see. So I have some posts. My current plan for this year is that I want to at least try and do 2 mass posts, which we'll be getting more into what mass posts are in a little bit. I want to do 2 master posts a month. One of them is going to be new web comics of the month, which I've been doing for the past year. That just goes through all of the various comics that I've gotten in the library over the past month. And then another one's just going to be whatever I kind of feel like for that month. I'm thinking next month I want to do Monster Lovers, which I think is going to be fun. I'm working on that lineup at the moment. It's gonna be good. And then another thing I'd like to do this year is I want to add a new category to my library. I want to look at specifically art styles, looking at what kind of color, like if a comic's full color, if it's black and white, somewhere in between, as well as multimedia aspects, like I said, like where people are adding videos into their content, moving pictures, GIFs in that case, audio, make that information more on the forefront so people can see how people are kind of moving forward with the webcomic medium and how they're kind of pushing those limits. There's also something kind of on the way. I've kind of mentioned this a couple weeks back in my kind of New Year's post reflecting on what was going on. There is something coming, but unfortunately, I don't know when it's going to be coming out. I'm guessing it's either going to be the end of this year or the end of next year. What I will say about it right now is that when it does come out, it's going to expand the work of the library and the broadcast of it in a really big way. I didn't think I'd have this kind of opportunity unless I myself I actually went into library work and actually just did it myself. But no, I get the opportunity to do it now. And that's something that's going to be really cool. And I'm really excited for people to learn about it.
All right. Well, with that, I think it is time to move into our performance showcase. So for every episode of this podcast, we like to do a performance showcase to highlight a particular pieces of a guest works. This can take a lot of different forms depending on whatever it is that we're discussing in that particular episode. Today, we are going to be looking at, let me scroll all the way to the top here because this thing is very long. We are going to look at Luma's completed comics of 2019 master post as an example of, I feel like, what this webcomic library does. I guess what we'll do is I'll describe this and then we'll talk about how this all came together. We'll link it in the show notes so you can go look through it, both to see how this looks and also, hey, maybe you want to check out some recent completed webcomics that come with, thorough descriptions and content warnings and all of that jazz. So yeah, this is the completed comics of 2019 master post over at webcomiclibrary.tumblr.com. Links in the show notes. So basically what this is it's just a giant list of comics. Like, however big you're thinking it is, it's bigger. And for each comic, there's a picture, whether that's like official cover art or from panels or whatever it is that's appropriate for the comic. Titles, links to the platform, and it also says what platform it's on, which is pretty convenient. Shows who it's created by, links the artists, websites and social media, along with donation platforms like Ko-fi, which I think is awesome personally, and then gives a summary for each and every webcomic. Again, this just goes on and on and on. Like, this thing is absolutely massive. How many comics are on this post, Luma?
Oh, kind of forgetting. I want to say 27. This actually isn't one of my longer posts. I've had longer posts, so I've been trying to keep it down some more over the years. And it's probably going to keep getting shorter because since I also kind of work 2 jobs and I'm getting ready to go back to school again.
Oh dear.
Yeah, I have no chill. So let's see. So with master posts, I'm essentially taking some inspiration from study groups, specifically like Study Blur, which is like the study side of Tumblr, where they essentially take big lists of links for various topics, everything from studying to certain like sciences, and basically taking a lot of links and then condensing it all and giving a brief summary of what those links go to. That's kind of how I originally got my start when I did Link Library, which was also a blog, and I also did master posts like this. But then I kind of adapted it to webcomics. So the first thing when it comes to making a webcomic master post is basically figuring out my lineup. I'm always taking comics specifically from Webcomic Library. I tend to not venture out specifically looking for comics when I'm working on a master post, unless it's something like, say, I'm just doing a general master post on, say, bisexuality, where I'm looking for bisexual representation. Anything is welcome. Come send me your stuff. But I don't tend to actively look for it. I usually tend to just stick with what's ever in my archive. So from there, from looking at my archive, I take out stuff that hasn't either been read by me or been submitted. I don't include anything like that because I also include content warnings. I don't always have the info to do that properly, unless it's through one of those 2 avenues. And then I might cherry pick a couple that seem a little bit out of place. For example, like the bisexual example I told you about. Like, if something is like, if it's like one little side character that shows up for just a brief amount of time compared to everything else that has bisexual folk in the main cast, I might decide to take that out. So then I have my pared down list of comics that I'm working with. At this point, I tend to aim between minimum of 5 and a maximum of, say, 30. So I used to get, like I said, it used to get a lot longer. I think my longest was about 80 or so. That was a 3-parter, which I learned quickly was a bad idea because even if I put in all that work, most people don't realize that it's in multiple parts because Tumblr has a data limit, and if I add too many links, the entire post crashes.
Oh no.
Yeah. So usually about 30 or so on a single post is my sweet spot at this point. So once I get my actual list of comics, I start actually working on the actual links that are included. Now, for me, when it comes to the actual comics, I tend to keep a list of what comic is directly linked on in my library, and as well as where those comics are mirrored. So that usually makes it pretty easy. I usually start off with comics that I've mentioned before. I actually have essentially a secret library for my library, specifically for master posts for stuff I've mentioned before. So I go through the different links and add those on, and then I also add on content warnings on that line, as well as the title, of course. And then I start working on creator links, which usually takes me the longest amount of time because, how do I say this? I can't say this nicely. If you're a content creator, make sure that your links are all in one place. Please. They say Shrek has layers, but have you tried looking through a content creator's? It's chaotic, to say the least. So I usually start off with where the comic is posted, let's say Tapas. And the thing about Tapas is that when you go to a creator's site, they tend to give a little area where you can put in links. So I start off with that setup, and then I look through those links and make sure that they're actually active. My general rule of thumb is if a link hasn't or a comic hasn't been active for over a year, then I won't include it. So I look through those links, make sure they're updated, and then I place them in. And then I tend to find more links on those other sites. So then I go through those, and then I find other stuff. And then I go through those links and make sure that there isn't anything extra that I haven't found yet. And then I basically rinse and repeat this process through all the creators that might be on a single webcomic. Normally it's only one or two, but sometimes it gets a bit complicated because sometimes you'll have artists that start off on a series but unfortunately have to leave, or sometimes you'll have two creators who often work together. So they'll have their own separate media, but then they'll also have like a group pair media account. So I have to kind of play it by ear to figure out how to organize those links for other people to find. Yeah. I actually have like a specific list for order for how I organize links on those posts. I think let's see if I can remember off the top of my head. So for creators, it goes Tumblr handle, portfolio site, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, DeviantArt, Patreon, and Ko-fi.
Solid.
And then I even have a little post-it note on my computer so I don't forget. And I forgot Pillow Fort somewhere in there, but it's fine. It's fine. So from there, and then we obviously have summaries, which are normally the easiest to do. But then again, sometimes creators, for whatever reason, don't include summaries. So I have to make up my own. Don't trust me with that. I mean, I'll come up with something okay. But you probably will do a better job than I will. And then the final step of that process is actually finding the photo that you see at the top. Now, normally, creators will sometimes just have a natural banner. Tapas has a naturally built-in banner, so I usually just kind of look it up, try and find it on Google. Unfortunately, that has like a kind of 50-50% chance of actually working because since Tapas is spelled Tapas, there is a chance that all I'll come up with is food photos, which is great.
I mean, hey, you get some recipes and some webcomics.
2 for 1 deal. So I have a few different methods for searching up photos. If I can't do that, I might try and just screenshot the photo every once in a while. And then the The feat is when I just contact the creator and actually get the photo off of them. But usually I can figure it out on my own. And then if they don't have a banner, I'll sometimes use an icon. And if I don't have anything like that, then I end up going through the comic to find a specific panel that I feel might raise questions for people who are looking for something to read, because I figure if somebody's asking a question, then they might want to look a bit deeper to figure out the answer. That's usually my rule of thumb for finding promotion photos. So from there, I basically finish up that comic, and then from that order, I work through the content that I've already previously mentioned, and then I'll edit as I go. I cross-reference comics, all my content from previous master posts to make sure like all my stuff is up to date. And if it's not up to date, I will update both the library and my master post library. And then I work on the new content. And then I just add my little handles at the very bottom. The day before, I will go through all of the links individually to make sure that they're all actually working in working order. And then once I get posted and I get all of the links set up in the various other handles I have around the internet, it is done.
Woo!
It's a process.
That was like a hypothetical woo, because you didn't actually do anything, but you were describing the process of doing something, and also I'm tired.
I can understand that.
I heard you say, and then it's done, and I just reflexively cheered. I was just like, wait, no, he didn't actually do anything.
I moved my mouth, and that is an accomplishment.
You also moved your vocal cords very, very quickly. So that's pretty solid.
Round of applause for all who are on this call.
All right. Well, the next thing in our show notes is it's art of Kirby with Bilet's hair. Thanks, Kaylee. Appreciate it.
So context. First of all, that's Kirby with Terra's hair from Final Fantasy VI.
Oh, I just saw the light green and was like, oh, it's probably Byleth because that's what's relevant right now.
So Alexis, it is kind of late for Alexis and I, and Alexis is sleepy. So to keep her awake, I filled our notes with pictures of Kirby's I found on the internet. And I would share them with you, except for they're unsourced and fan art, and I don't want to do that, but there's Kirby's.
There's Kirby's, but after the apparently not Byleth Kirby, and I've already forgotten what it was, and don't remind me because I don't care, we have our listener questions. So for every episode of this podcast, we take questions from our listeners. You can submit questions for us or for our guests on our Twitter at strqueercast, via email settingtherecordqueer@gmail.com, or in our Setting the Record Queer community Discord at bit.ly/strqcord. Our listener question this week is from Yari Valtean. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that correctly, who asked, I've noticed that the comics are tagged with content warnings as well as categories. How do you go about making sure comics are tagged correctly?
Well, normally I'm actually reading the comics as I go along. So I tend to read a lot of the comics that I have. If you see a need to read tag in my library, then that means that I haven't fully gone through it. Or if you haven't seen submissions, be wary, because I haven't been able to actually fully go through that comic yet. But for the content, I'm usually updating it as I go along. Admittedly, I feel like I can do a bit on the content warnings, because I think I can streamline the process a little bit to make it a bit more user-friendly. But I also need to cross-reference with a lot of different libraries to find enough references for me to actually do it well. So for content warnings, I have more basic ones. For example, blood, gore, phrase, self-explanatory. You have violence, you got some more mature content warnings, not safe for work, and various varieties therein. I mostly, when I originally made the content warning setup, I was more basing it on what other people needed and that I was recommending comics to. For example, or for myself, for example, if you look in the content warnings, you'll see I actually have a needle syringe warning because that's actually a personal trigger for me. But if I know that the content is there, I can usually handle it. So yeah, with content warnings, I try and be as meticulous as I can. I'm aware that I'm only one person, so there's obviously the risk that I might have missed something, in which case, if you find any content that I haven't personally marked, feel free to message me because I will change that as soon as I can. And with submissions, I try and trust the creators. I've had issues with creators where they'll send me a submission and they won't flesh out their content warning section. I'm assuming because there's quite a few folks who see that I have a submission set up, but they don't realize that there's actually a library connected to it, which is an odd issue to have since my library is literally called the Webcomic Library, in which case I'll ask for more clarification and or I will go through the content myself to make sure that everything is in order.
All right. So with that, I think it's time we move on to our final segment, Kaylee's question of the week. Now, if you've ever
I think you missed some Kirby's, babe.
Okay, fine. These Kirby's were for you, not the.
Look, it's in the show notes. We have to cover it. That's how this works.
All right, okay, between the listener questions and the Kaylee question of the week, there is a Ruby and Sapphire Kirby from Steven Universe.
That's amazing.
They're really good.
Those were for you, though.
And now they're for the world.
Anyway, Kaylee's question of the week are normal questions, as you watch the hordes and hordes of Kirby's descending on you from outside your window, and you open the trapdoor that you put under your floor to find the password entry screen, which you've long since forgotten. So you go to answer the security question, and there it is. That's the question of the week right there. So this week's question of the week, which again, if you don't remember what you answered to it before, will get you kind of covered in Kirby's, which now that I say aloud, actually seems pretty nice.
Friend.
That sounds very wholesome.
Anyway, describe your ideal physical webcomic library. I think for mine, I want it to be like sci-fi screens that you move around with your hands and you just pull webcomics off the shelves, the kind of technology that's really impractical, and why would you ever build anything this way, but it looks really visually cool. Where you just gesture towards a shelf and a webcomic flies out in front of you, and then you go, oh, Jim Davis, that Garfield is always such a hoot.
See what I want is, so I want all physical, first of all, I want all physical prints, unless that's completely impractical, because I just like reading things on paper.
There's no impractical for this question. I just put sci-fi technology in mind.
Okay, fair enough. I just like reading things on paper. Even if it was drawn on a computer and meant to be read on a computer, I like paper. I want to be able to read while I'm just laying in an official webcomic library bed, but I also don't want to have to hold the comic up above my face, so I want a robot arm to hold the comic above me and turn the pages for me.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
It's the dream.
It's like the first thing that comes to mind is just fantasy library. I just want a big open library space, kind of almost like your classic like just underground, a lot of wood, maybe just like a random tree in the center where it can kind of read underneath it, lighting unknown. Just having like hammocks in random places. You don't know how you get up there, but you'll find a way up there. And like if you're looking for something specific, it'll just kind of peek its way out. Like it doesn't necessarily come to you, but the library knows what you want.
That's all right. It sounds like we all have our own libraries, which I have a surprise for you. Look underneath your chair. There's ground there.
That's not very surprising.
Oh, thank God.
I mean, hey, think about if there wasn't ground there.
Yeah, that would certainly be surprising. You said surprise, and there was no surprise.
Surprise!
Oh, that was the surprise! Whoa!
Reality is working.
Surprise! We are all alive.
Wild.
Who would have thunk?
Well,
all right, well, yeah, that about does it. Luma, thank you so much for coming on to our podcast. Where can our listeners find you and your webcomics library and the Discord that you mentioned and anything else you'd like to direct their attention to?
Well, you can find Webcomic Library on Tumblr, Twitter, and Pillow Fort at Webcomic Library. And then for the actual Webcomic Library itself, you can look it up at tagpacker.com/webcomic.library. And then if you're looking for anything else, you can also find all of my content and a little bit more at linktr.ee/webcomiclibrary.
And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/settingtherecordqueer. Our patrons can get early guest reveals, access to a special patrons exclusive Discord channel, high quality or early episode releases, and even special thanks on the show. We'd like to offer our special thanks to our $25 patron, Jane, who you can find on Twitter as @callmecadejo. That's @callmecadejo. Otherwise, if you liked this podcast, be sure to subscribe or leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. Tell a friend about us or recommend us on your social media. You can find us on Twitter at STRQueercast, via email at settingtherecordqueer@gmail.com, or in our Setting the Record Queer community Discord at bit.ly/strqcord, all lowercase. While you're there, ask questions for us or for our guests, or send feedback about the podcast. Maybe you have a cool idea for who or what could be on this podcast, or think you should be on this podcast. Please let us know. We're always looking for ideas. The logo for this podcast was drawn by Cubotic. That's at QBTIC on Twitter, or Cobot, QOBOT.tumblr.com. The theme music and production for this podcast was done by Thrill Me Music. You can find more information about her work at thrillmemusic.squarespace.com. Kaylee, where can our listeners find you?
People can find me on Twitter at WitchesHex. That's WITCHS Hex. Or you can follow SoulSync's development at SoulSyncGame on Twitter. That's SOULSYNC game. Yeah, that's my stuff.
And you can find me on Twitch and Twitter as Double Gear SYS, as in Double Gear System. And you can find my Final Fantasy XIV virtual photography shenanigans over at instagram.com/echo_white. That's EKHO_white, as in the color. Our favorite answer to last week's Kaylee's question of the week, which was describe what you do in last episode's text-based adventure game, came from Propagable in the Discord. who said, my intended actions would be to like, subscribe, and ding that bell. Our next episode is going to be on synthwave music with Jess from Online. With that, thank you so much for listening, and we will see you in 2 weeks.
It's time to set the record queer. Oh wait, do we have the tags for the episode
No.
yet? I thought that could be funny. I have no idea how it's
I
sounded,
don't
though.
think that works.